No, I can go ahead and read it. I got it right here on my desktop. Okay, so this is an important notice regarding city meetings. This meeting is being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with state of California executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Zoom and YouTube are being utilized for this meeting. In case of technical issues, meetings will be uploaded to the city website as soon as possible after the meeting. We will be conducting today's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. Planning commissioners and staff are participating from remote locations, practicing appropriate social distancing. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting by use of Zoom as noted on the city's website and the agenda. Members of the public wishing to speak to the commission may do so during public comment or may comment on agenda items during discussion of each item and must be logged into Zoom. YouTube is a viewing only format. Anyone using abusive, vulgar, offensive, threatening, or harassing language, personal attacks of any kind, or offensive terms that target specific individuals or groups will be muted and removed from the meeting. Please do not abuse this new way to provide public comment.
Thank you. So we'll have the roll call now, please.
Sure. Commissioner Kelly?
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Burns?
Here.
Commissioner Fritz?
Here.
Vice Chair Fernandez?
Here.
And Chair Ottinger.
Here.
We have a full membership tonight.
Okay, the next item is comments from the public on items not on the agenda. So is there anyone here wishing to speak on items not on the agenda?
And if you
But
do
don't
wish to do
leave us
so,
alone.
you can use and this goes for all public comment at appropriate times. You can use the raise hand in Zoom. You can send me a chat noting that you'd like to make a comment if you don't know where the raise hand is, or you can show your video and use your physical hand as well.
Thank you.
Chair Ottinger, I do not see any comments for items not on the agenda, and we have not received any comments via email either.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, statements of conflict of interest. Not seeing any here today, so thank you. And moving on to item 5, the regular agenda items. The first is the draft housing element presentation.
Thank you, Chair Ottinger. We have with us tonight Jane Riley from Four Leaf, as well as Elliot Pickett. They have been our consultants working with us. Everyone on the commission I know has seen them from time to time at these meetings, getting input or making presentations. We have now released the draft of our housing element that was released last Thursday. It's on this meeting page, but it's also on our housing element page as well for members of the public. That has a 30-day notice period. And this is kind of the first of a couple presentations we'll be doing. We will be doing the same presentation if you know someone who would like to see it in real life at the city council meeting next Tuesday as well. And so Jane, I think Elliot and I are going to try to handle this, and if we get caught up, you can just jump in. So we're going to be going through a few steps that are in sections of the housing element, the state requirements, the community engagement that we've done to date, the goals, policies, and programs. And last time we were at the Planning Commission in November, December of last year, we looked at a number of options for those, got recommendations from the Planning Commission, and then also got input from the City Council. So we're now returning with the draft housing element that includes the selected policies that we're proposing to be included for the next 8 years. Assessment of fair housing, and then discussion of our RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation, and the housing sites that we are looking to include in our site inventory. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps.
Hello. Thank you, Carrie, for the introduction and the welcome. As Carrie said, I'm Elliot, and I'm here representing the four-leaf team along with Jane Riley. And we're going to start just with a brief overview of the housing element requirements. So next slide, there's many components that go into the housing element, including those you see on screen with nice little visuals. We've covered some bits and pieces of these in previous meetings, most notably the goals, policies, and programs proposed. The released draft contains all of these different elements, and we'll go over about half of them in this presentation. First, we're going to go over some of the engagement, outreach, and input opportunities. Again, we've discussed these at previous meetings, but we did community input. We got community input, stakeholder input, and planning commission, as well as city council input. We used a variety of methods to gather this input. We had 2 community surveys. We went in person at the farmers market, in person flyering, and had information and links on the web page to relevant information. And there's a little graphic of that flyer on the right. For stakeholder input, we talked to developers, business owners, advocacy groups, CBOs, and the school district. We had a survey, and this got knocked off the slide, but we also did some one-on-one interviews and cohort interviews for some of these groups and individuals. And then we went to city council and planning commission on a couple of different items. We got input on big policy ideas and big program changes, including those listed on screen. Next, we just have an example from the 2 surveys. The first survey was on housing needs and opportunities. We got some answers to questions and a lot of write-in responses that were really helpful. The second survey, we sought specific input on policies and programs. Here's an example of one of the questions where we talked about a proposed policy and got input. So we had, again, that yes, no, or unsure, but a lot of the useful input we got from this was in the write-in responses. So put a couple little clips from those write-in responses there. We've used this input to put together the proposed document that we put together, but the more robust community input that we're hoping to get from this draft will be, again, integrated in this mandatory revise and review period before finalizing what we're submitting to the state. And on to you, Carrie.
Thank you. So as noted, we have kind of 4 primary goals. The way our housing element works, just as well as our general plan and our new climate action framework, we start off with big goals and then talk about what policies we feel implement those goals, and then what programs, which are the more specific actions that we are going to be look to be doing in the next 8 years, if we're not already doing them, to implement those goals. So the big 4 goals for this housing element update, one is to facilitate the development of housing. And some of them are related. The second is to remove governmental constraints. The housing conservation is another part of, it's not just new housing, but it's also conserving the housing stock we have, and then making sure that everyone has fair access to housing. So the first goal, facilitate the development of new housing. There are a few policies. One is to make sure we maintain a sufficient inventory of suitable sites. Those of you who are involved with the housing elements in the past, you'll know that one of the things we're required to do is identify appropriate sites for housing development. And that includes looking at it by the size and scale, but also the likely development in terms of whether it's prime for acceptable and appropriate for affordable housing, above market housing, single family housing, or what are the various different types that we could get on the various sites. When we talked with both the Planning Commission and the City Council, we're suggesting that we maintain an administrative list that is not within the housing element of additional sites that can be added to the inventory if needed. The reason for this is the state has just passed legislation that we cannot reuse sites that are on our site inventory unless there are specific circumstances in the next housing element. And we know not all however many sites we have are going to be developed. But it also is important because if you do want to develop a site, say someone comes in and wants to do less than the number of units that were anticipated to be there, then you need to be able to add sites to your inventory so that you still have the right number of sites for the remaining number of housing units you're supposed to produce in the 8 years. A good example of this is actually the Barlow Townhomes, also known as the Davis Townhomes, that was recently developed. That was slated, I think, for something about 30 units. Well, it turns out that they did look at doing some ADUs or garden apartments, but it's in a floodplain, so it had a lot of restrictions, and so it did develop with less than the anticipated number of units. That's fine because we had other sites available. In this case, we need to make sure that there are other sites that we can add to that list. A3 is to encourage a variety of housing types. And you'll see when we get through, when we talk about our pipeline and anticipated projects, we do have a variety of different sites and different that would have different types of housing, including accessory dwelling units, potential for mixed use and commercial zones, and areas for multifamily housing. A4 is to promote the development of new housing units that are affordable, and this is the range from the deed restricted capital A affordable, from extremely low to moderate income households, and to housing units that are appropriate and affordable to special needs households. And those can be someone, we'll talk a little bit more about what a special need household is as we get further into this. So the programs that we have related to this, to the goal of facilitating development of new housing. One is to develop and adopt objective design standards and SB 9 standards. We actually have we're about to start with a contractor that we've already selected to develop both of those. That is set to initiate in August. And that is helpful because it provides some certainty for the community in terms of the state laws, but also developers coming in and what they would need to do to do housing in an appropriate way within those guidelines. Adopting a workforce housing overlay zone. And so this is a place where it would actually be a new zoning district, an overlay, sort of like the environmental overlay we have down by the Laguna. But in this case, it's actually a zoning that can help someone who wants to provide additional housing on select sites. And so this would be developing the zoning criteria. And then the next step would either be for the city to select which sites might be appropriate for that. And then, of course, if it's in the zoning code, a developer or someone can come in and request that for a particular site that they feel is appropriate. Encourage facilitating and supporting the development of ADUs. The city of Sebastopol is actually a pretty good leader, I think, on our accessory dwelling units, between the housing fair we had a few years ago, the work with the Napa Sonoma ADU Center is, we've done some videos with that. We don't require a planning permit for most ADUs. It just goes straight to building, and they route it to us, so it makes it a little bit simpler for that. But there are a few other things we can do. One of the items is to continue to support the Napa Sonoma ADU Center. And also when someone does have an ADU that would potentially need a variance or use permit, as we had earlier this year when it was a non-conforming structure that was pretty much being demolished. One of the suggestions was, can we go ahead and make that a staff level decision instead of having to go through the planning commission to help ease those? And so those are the types of programs for encouraging and assisting with ADUs. Supporting efforts of housing developers, and that can be a variety of things, including having information out there, as well as, assisting them with pre-development review meetings and things like that. And then programs specifically to facilitate affordable housing. Those include things like encourage and promote the density bonus incentives. The city of Sebastopol, in our code, we adopt the state's density bonus outright, but then we have density bonus incentives kind of throughout our code. Like we do allow an extra story and additional height for deed restricted affordable housing. We do have a number of parking reductions and density reductions if it's a studio or senior housing or some other special needs housing. So making sure that people know about those and encouraging people to use those. Fee mitigation. This is actually a state, and Jane, I'm going to ask you to step in and explain the details of this, but this is actually a state requirement and I believe this is allowing, well, there's twofold. One is to have impact fees based on the size of the unit, and this commission and the city council have already adopted that, so we're well on our way there. We do not, most cities have to change that. We do not have to change that because we are already encouraging smaller units and giving them smaller fees. And additionally, I believe there's also a requirement now that any housing project that requests the deferral of impact fees to the certificate of occupancy final inspection, that they can do that now as well. And Jane, am I missing any of those programs?
You summed it well. Just the transparency requirement, the requirement to have all those fees up on the website, and going back and asking developers after they've constructed what their fees were and putting those on the website with a disclaimer saying it's not your information. So.
Thank you, Jane. So yes, we already have all of our fees on the website, and for the last one, we actually added that to the Exhibit C standard conditions of approval, that any housing developers have to report to us their total fees at the end. So we're anticipating that one already. And then supporting applications for affordable housing funding. The city of Sebastopol, we have two different funds for affordable housing. One is the housing linkage fee that commercial projects are required to pay into. We don't get a lot of money for that. I think the balance of that account is about $150,000 right now. We will get money from that when the hotel goes in, because that is one of those that would pay that fee. And then we have an in lieu affordable housing fund when people pay the in lieu fee for a portion of a inclusionary unit that they might have to build. We have about $200,000 in that. So we don't have a huge amount of funding. However, we are part of the Sonoma County Cities and Towns Advisory Committee. The Sonoma County CDC, Community Development Commission, which is in essence, they also house the housing authority for the county, non-entitlement jurisdiction. So all the the 7 smaller cities and the CDC go together in terms of allocating funding. And I sit on that board for the cities and towns for the city of Sebastopol, and that's actually a good place to look for funding for some of the housing opportunities, supporting affordable housing developers who might go in. And if you know that they're always looking for applications that are within the non-entitlement cities or the county. So we'll be looking at trying to support some applications for that as they might come forward with the city. Goal B is to remove constraints to housing. And some of the simple steps are monitoring the city's codes and procedures and understanding places where they could be streamlined. One of the options that was actually suggested in the Sonoma County Grand Jury report on affordable housing was, could we potentially combine a pre-application review that's going to go before the Planning Commission and a design review board as a joint meeting? It's actually a pretty good suggestion. We're not going to combine our boards and commissions for good, because there's a lot of different disparate policy. But if there is a project coming forward that's appropriate to do that with, those are the types of things to look at in our city codes. expediting and prioritizing review and permitting of affordable housing. The objective design standards will help with that in part, and certainly during COVID and otherwise, we have been prioritizing housing projects. Encourage staff or ensure staff and decision makers are up to date on housing law. This is actually something we've been doing a pretty good job on, because we do have Myers and Ave give updates from time to time to the commission and the council. And so continuing that is really a big piece of that, to make sure that we understand what we're required to do as a city and how we're required to review housing projects. And then ensure easy access to housing development information. We do have some of that on our website, certainly having it in Spanish and other languages would be helpful. That's something we might be looking to do, and hopefully get some assistance from ABEG there. And so in terms of programs to remove the constraints, I already talked about monitoring city codes. One in particular that Four Leaf identified was, and I think this was from discussions with some developers, although I'm not sure, it might have been just reviewing the code, is to streamline the reasonable accommodation procedure that we have when someone does need to make a modification to make it a unit accessible. Expediting processing of affordable housing projects, we already talked about that one, and then monitoring housing trends. And in fact, I think our planning commission series from affordable housing and developers last year is the type of thing. And I know Commissioner Fritz has also suggested some additional discussions of cottage housing and other types of housing that could be considered. Goal C is housing conservation. So our existing housing stock, the policies under that are monitoring units that are affordable now, but at risk of losing their affordability restrictions. There isn't necessarily a lot the city can do about that, but we certainly do want to work with especially the bigger multifamily locations that to see if we can get those renewed. The Burbank housing on the north side of town was one of those in this current housing cycle, where their deed restrictions were expired. However, they did renew and did a major renovation, added some accessible units. And I know we as planning staff and building staff are helping them through that process. They're now back into another 55-year deed restriction. And so that's considered not at risk anymore. And I believe the Burbank, some of the Burbank housing, affordable housing is set to expire in this next round. And so that's definitely one where we want to work with them to make sure that we can maintain that as affordable units. I think that there's about 60 units at the Burbank Heights in that category. Ensure safe, habitable housing without discrimination against tenants. And this is really something related to the building department in terms of making sure that our housing units are habitable, supporting low-income homeowners, as well as tenants, in helping them make sure that they that any housing issues are resolved. I do know from talking to our building official, Steve Brown, that he does get a few calls a year. Usually they have something to do with mold. He does certainly make sure that those tenants are, those names are kept confidential, and he tries to assist as much as possible in terms of getting those situations fixed. Provide rehabilitation assistance to eligible homeowners. And there's a couple of programs. The city itself doesn't have a program that and the city council actually did discuss this a little bit. We don't really have the staff or the capacity to do direct assistance to eligible homeowners. However, there are a number of programs that are administered by the Sonoma County CDC. So we can make sure that we have information for that available. And then I know the council does support through their community benefit grants, the Rebuilding Sebastopol Together, which also offers and works with low-income homeowners. And the last program here is promoting energy efficiency in housing. And this is a big topic for the Climate Action Committee right now, actually, in terms of, it's great to do, if you remember Phoebe's presentation, new housing construction and new buildings are easy to get those energy conservation targets, but what do you do about the electrifying existing housing and upgrading existing housing? And so that's the fourth leg on this goal. I think I kind of reviewed most of these. When I was going through the policies, the CDC has programs for homeowners rehabilitation. And then in terms of energy conservation, our Climate Action Committee has already recommended that or in the process of recommending to council that we adopt Cal Green Tier 1. That's one level above the baseline for the state for energy conservation. And so that will, this is another code cycle this year for building codes. I know Paul knows that. It's very cringing, but that is definitely something that our building department is going to be looking to do this year. The last goal, ensuring fair access to housing. We have 5 goals related to that. The first is to promote and affirmatively further fair housing opportunities throughout the community. And I might ask Elliot or Jane to talk about that one a little bit as we get into the programs. Encourage long-term and permanent affordability of lower and moderate special needs housing. If there are ways we can, say for instance, with the Sonoma County Land Trust, buy units and deed restrict them as affordable, especially if they are accommodating special needs, or able to do that. That's one of the things we can look at. Educate the community about fair and affordable housing. This could be things like the housing fair that the city held a few years ago at the community center, but it could also be easier things like information on the website or more local programs. Improve housing opportunities for special needs household. And I do know that there's definitely folks on this very commission who talk about universal design whenever a proposal comes up, and making sure that things are, people are able to age in place for seniors. But there are other special needs households, the RV special safe parking site and other things that the city is working on for homeless support. And then promote opportunities and programs that offer lower income households home ownership opportunities. Again, that can be things like the Sonoma County Land Trust, and we have been talking about applying for a community development block grant to purchase houses, deed restrict them, and then resell them to as affordable units. Again, a lot of the outreach and administering of housing service landlord education is something that the Sonoma County Community Development Commission, and that's sort of the housing authority for the county, does a lot of, and they have resources for that. And part of that's getting that out to the community. I know we are working with them as well on a number of other affordable housing initiatives at this time. Amend the code, and this is a state law to allow by right permanent supportive housing and low barrier navigation centers. So permanent supportive housing is already allowed anywhere housing is allowed in the city of Sebastopol through definition. And that includes, so permanent supportive housing as a definition. And I actually asked Elliot to add these as definitions to the housing element, but Park Village, where they have units, but then they also have supportive caseworkers and provide guidance and healthcare. That's considered permanent supportive housing, where you're providing not just the housing, but the social support to go along with it. Low barrier navigation centers are, and I'm gonna stall on the definition of this because this was one that I had to look up, I'll admit. But it's because it isn't a homeless shelter, but it is a place for people experiencing homelessness to go and receive help in terms of where to go for various services. pursuing first-time homebuyer programs and affordable housing homeownership resources. I think I already discussed that one, and then requiring replacement housing units when required under state law. And there are a few instances that would require that.
Thank you. So I'm just going to expand a little bit on this fair housing topic here. There's more requirements for the housing element about fair housing as implemented by AB 686. And this required an assessment of fair housing. This entire assessment of fair housing is found in the technical background report of the housing element. It's the longest part of the housing element, a pretty meaty document, but it is also summarized within that section 1 of the housing element. So as part of this process, the assessment of fair housing covered 5 different topics. What you see on screen, that's the enforcement and outreach capacity, segregation and integration, concentrated areas of poverty and affluence, disparities in access to opportunity, and disproportionate housing needs, including displacement. So this is a lot of looking to data and numbers, talking to people and getting local knowledge, mapping different factors across different protected classes to analyze what these fair housing issues are. So there were 2 main fair housing issues that were shown from this analysis. The first one being neighborhoods at risk of becoming exclusive. So as part of this analysis, we identify the factors that contribute to fair housing issues, or the contributing factors, and then identify strategies that could be used to address those factors. The 4 contributing factors identified for this fair housing issue were community opposition, access to financing for small sites, displacement due to housing costs, and the limited availability of affordable units in a range of sizes. And most of these, or all of these programs we've already discussed in the last couple of slides, but here we've identified places where those programs line up to meet the needs identified for the fair housing issue. The other fair housing issue identified on the next slide is the limited fair housing enforcement and outreach. In this, there were 2 main factors that contributed to this, which is the lack of language access and the lack of resources. And again, we've identified programs that can seek to address these issues. I do want to highlight this. This is a main area that we are seeking for community input on. We'd like to hear both if this is what you see in the community based on your local knowledge, and where knowledge may not be integrated completely. We'd also like to get input on what priorities are within here. There's a lot of actions that we're trying to implement through the safety element, or that we're proposing for the city to implement, and being able to prioritize these contributing factors, these actions, is a main way that HCD is seeking to ensure that the housing elements can meaningfully tackle these fair housing issues. So we'll include information at the very end of the slide on how to share your input, but we would really appreciate any input on this fair housing assessment and the strategies to address these issues.
So the next part is, so those are sort of the policies about how we're developing housing. The next is sort of the looking at the development patterns in the city, starting off with the regional housing needs allocation. I know I presented this a couple of times to the commission already, but we did receive the final allocation. And so this is, when you're looking at this chart, we have within the next 8 years, the target is 213 units. And that would be distributed among the different very low, moderate, and above moderate incomes. The only one that could be challenging in my mind is the above moderate income. We are just barely meeting that, actually, and I think we have met our current RHNA of 120, so about half of what we're looking at next year. We're right now in 7 years into our 8-year cycle. We've permitted 123 units of 120 required. So we have 3 more units in this cycle that are required. The category we're not meeting is the above moderate, but we do have enough moderate that they are, it's considered compliant because they can count towards an upper income limit. They just can't for a more a lower income. But in terms of our next target of 213 units, we are expecting to be able to meet that RENA through 3 different means. One is our ADU development. We have had a pretty steady pace of developing ADUs or converting garages or accessory structures to ADUs. We have a number of planned, approved, and pending projects projected to be developed during the planning period. And I think we have a list of those, but obviously the most recent that this group saw were the Huntley Square and 10-unit townhomes and the Habitat for Humanity, which is going to council next Tuesday for final review. So those and a number of other projects that have just had design review or don't require any type of review, but are planned and looking to just get those permitted. And then we do have a number of sites in the site inventory. Those include both vacant and non-vacant land. I think we've got a map in a little bit showing the various housing sites. But this is, so what this chart is looking at the top is the RENA allocation for each income group. And then the credits is really the, for the next line is really the pipeline. So those are the projects that are already have some sort of formal application to the city. And so for that, we're looking at 60 very low income, 23 low income, 15 moderate, and 107 above moderate. So that's almost there as the target. We know probably not all of those will get built, but that's a pretty good pipeline in terms of what's in the queue. That does include things that have had a preliminary review or a pre-application meeting with staff. We've had a couple of those recently. And then we also project out the number of accessory dwelling units we anticipate, and that's approximately 15. Sorry, it's not 15 per year, it's 60 total over 8 years. So it's a little less than 10 per year. Or 10, but that tends to be evenly split across the income zones. So we're attributing 15 to each of those. We do assessments when those come in terms of what type each is. But there've also been rent studies that show that it does cross the gamut. For housing sites, for new sites that you might not know about, we have a number of vacant sites. They tend to be in the the one-off or the smaller subdivisions that aren't subject to, that don't hit the target of 5 units that would require inclusionary housing. So for vacant sites, they are split between the moderate and above moderate. And then for the non-vacant sites, we have a few of those spread across the various income levels as well. And so the total units, and this is kind of counting up, it's a little bit of counting your chickens before they hatch, because those are in the pipeline, and what you have available in terms of other sites added to it is well above it's about 150% of what we actually need. So it's about 150 units surplus. And sorry, I probably did the math wrong because Elliot's got 72% down here on the bottom. So the buffer, Elliot, if you can chime in, is just sort of looking at how many more we have than we necessarily need. I'm assuming.
So we've identified 72% above what we actually need. So if you had a 100% buffer, it would be double the units.
Thank you. So it's not 150%, it's 172% then. Thank you. And then this is a map of the sites. We do have a few from last round that are still present, but we also have some new ones. And I'm happy to I don't want to go over all the various sites, but they do include things that either the city, we've identified as staff, I know our guideline subcommittee had some discussion of potential sites. And I know this commission has as well, and from time to time, other sites come up that are developer driven, where we get questions about interest on the site. So those are included as well. And we can bring this up because I know you probably have questions and interest on these when we get to the questions, but just we do have the non-vacant sites are sort of dashed around, and the red are all considered market rate sites. And the orange are moderate, and the yellow are the lower income sites.
Right, thank you. And then just to wrap us up for the presentation part, next steps, there's a presentation of the same material to City Council on August 2nd. That is next week. Yes, in 1 week. This housing element public feedback window is open through August 22nd. So tell your family, your friends, your loved ones, get your input put in so we can include it before we send this into the state. That will be finalized with public feedback. There's a required 10 working day window where we spend the time looking through all of the input and making sure that it is addressed. And we revise the housing element to address that input. Then it goes into HCD for the review. Once they get back to us, we get back to them with revisions. It's a little bit of an iterative process. And then early next year, we will have an adopted housing element. And then for our final slide, just want to make sure that everybody knows how to provide feedback. We've got an email option, a call option, and a mail option if anybody wants to send in snail mail. You can also provide comments through email directly to HCD at the email address provided. That
All right, and of course, all this
wraps this up.
contact information is on the city's website under planning as well, so. All right, so that is it for the presentation. There's obviously a lot more good stuff actually in the documents that you have available to you, but we're happy to take any questions. And I can go back to any of those slides that you might have questions on as well.
Are there any questions of staff or our presenters?
Linda here.
Hi, Linda.
Hey, okay.
You have the floor.
Just a little bit about the format in reading this. On page 32 of the actual report, it's just an example. Item C2, inclusionary housing ordinance, says it's been successful. And then in the last column, it's completed. New inclusionary housing ordinance provides flexibility. We have received good feedback, and now the program is completed and removed. Explain to me what that means, that the program is completed and removed. It doesn't mean the ordinance is removed, I imagine. Just
Correct. It means that we're removing it from our next housing element because it's done and checked off.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Yeah, and that is part of that section. That is part of the housing element where you have to report on your prior housing element and how you've done in terms of the programs, if they're successful, if they're completed, if they're not successful, what you would need, or if it's just not feasible. And so this was a stab of going through that. It's similar to what we report to HCD on an annual basis, where we have to report on these housing policy programs as well.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Linda, do you have any more?
No, that's good for right now.
Okay, thank you. Well, Paul, Commissioner Fritz, do you have questions?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. And table 8, which is page 27 of the report, page 34 of the PDF. And this actually comes in later. And I just had this question about the quantified objectives. I wasn't,
Is
I
this
don't
what you're?
know if yeah, so, and it talks about it later on the report, there's a whole section about quantified objectives. And I'm just wondering if someone can explain what that is to me, because I wasn't quite following what that was tracking, I guess.
What page again, Paul?
It's page 27 of the report itself, or page 34 of the PDF.
So
Okay.
Paul, this particular table 8, this is reporting on how the city did in meeting last cycle's quantified objectives. So there's 2 sets of quantified objectives, one in section 1 that's reporting out from how well you did last time. And then there's a new section of quantified objectives. And it's simply quantification of what you plan to do. It has to be at least as great as the RENA, but it can be more. And it can have non-unit housing types. And it's really an expression of what the city wants to achieve quantified in the next housing element cycle.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And then my other question, and this is, it starts with figure 21, which is page 89 of the report or 96 of the PDF. So if you look at, so this is housing sites and percent non-white population. I'm a little puzzled as to Meadowlark Field, which is the blue in the very northeast corner of the site, having 21 to 40% of non-white population. I don't believe there's anyone living there. And the site across Highway 12 from there has 41 to 60% non-white population, which is also, I believe, open space. So just puzzled as to how, and the next few tables also have kind of similar kind of puzzling demographics for those empty lots, empty places.
These tables are based on, in some cases, census tract data, in some cases, census block data. Either way, they do not conform to city boundaries. So what we have shown here is where that aligns with city boundaries. But for instance, that one that Carrie's got her mouse on right now, that tract extends far beyond the city boundaries. And so that is reflecting the percentage that's a population with a disability within that entire, I think that's tract.
Okay.
And this really highlights that importance of getting the local knowledge in there. And if it didn't make sense to you reading it, it is not explained well enough. So
Yeah, it's a good point, because those two, and you can tell because the Laguna Santa Rosa is right there. There is nothing other than open space and industrial uses. There's no housing there.
The gas station.
So that might the gas station, the open space, the Laguna, and the park. And similar, this is Tamagotchi Park. The Park Village Mobile Home is on the west side of Laguna.
Yeah.
So if this is correct, that is both of those. I don't know if it's possible to just blank those out as non-residential,
So
places.
we don't blank them out, but we need to talk about the fact that this census tract extends far beyond the city boundaries. And so what you're seeing within the city is a misrepresentation. So
Yeah,
we
that would be
just need to
helpful, because
add that local knowledge to this discussion. That's what
Yeah, and I think that's helpful because they're different colors than what the main body of the city is. And so
Right.
you sort of look at it and go, well, what's the explanation for it? But yeah, that's a really good point, Commissioner Fritz.
thank you. Yeah, that explanation makes
Yeah.
sense. But yeah, just looking at this and thinking, no one's living there. How does this,
Right.
how does this have
If you had the green
25% of
space
LMI
over it,
population?
yeah.
A little
yeah.
confusing. So yeah, that would be helpful. And those are the ones that jumped out. There may be other parcels that are, I mean, those are the obvious ones. The other parks and things are around, surrounded by development, but those two just jumped out because of where they are and what I know
Right,
about
and
them.
where that line is, yeah.
Yeah. And then others, just like a general question that I just don't know. And that is, so is any market rate development assumed to be all above moderate in terms of income levels? Or is there any way for market rate development to qualify for one, like a moderate, for example? I mean, there may be some market rate developments that do have what would be considered moderate. units, but I'm just wondering in terms of how this gets calculated for the housing element. Is any market rate development assumed to be only applicable for above moderate?
Above moderate.
Generally,
Um,
yes. With the exception of the study that was done for accessory dwelling units, so we can distribute it across that continuum. And the reason that we don't assume moderate when a unit may in fact, a market rate multifamily unit may in fact rent for moderate. But unless we know and can say this is what the projected rent is going to be, or this is what the projected sales price is going to be, we can't count it with HCD.
Okay. Great, thank you. I think that was all my questions for now.
Okay, Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. If you go to the page 20 on the report,
20 on the report.
yes, on the actual.
Yeah, so that pages, okay.
Yeah. So looking at that graph there, it's showing 29.4% for seasonal, recreational, or occasional use. How is that defined? And it's such a large percentage that sticks out there.
You have that census definition in front of you there, Elliot.
I was
Seasonal
actually pulling
recreation-
it up.
Seasonal recreation and occasional use means pretty much exactly what you would think it is. These are second homes. Potentially they could be vacation rentals. If the city was allowing vacation rentals, and they could also be homes that are used only occasionally. Could be a lot of different things. These are not ones that are undergoing a renovation so that they can be rented or sold. These are ones that are specifically seasonal, recreational, or occasional.
And how do
Within,
Go ahead.
it's a census definition. Elliot will pull it up for you. When you're looking at a county, like you see Sonoma County, the dark blue in the Sonoma County, that's their percentage of their vacant units that are in that category. It's much more common in an unincorporated county to have seasonal and recreational dwellings, the fisher huts and the camper, hunting huts and that kind of stuff. It's much less common to see them in the city. So when you see that 30% of your vacant units are being held for this reason in a city, it makes you want to stop and see what's going on.
Right,
how
and
do
I
you-
think the important thing to look at is, because it does sort of look like, well, that's weird. But then look at the total number of vacant units. So in the county, it's 18,000 vacant units of some sort. We only have 143. So I know we have 18 licensed non-hosted vacation rentals. So that's, I don't know if we, so those would be under that blue. But yes, people who have bought a home because they're planning on retiring up here and they're coming up here for only, some weekends and things like that at this point, but they're planning on moving here. I know we have a number of those. I believe those would also be in that dark blue category. And that would be the occasional use. I don't think we have any, seasons like Tahoe does, but it's in that way.
I'm just wondering how you get that data. I mean, how do you get that of people having second homes and not occupying them or being vacant is, it sounds like it would be difficult, not concrete data to get. So I'm just wondering how that's gathered. Where's the source?
This is census data, but you bring up a really good point, and it's something that a lot of communities are struggling right now. Really, how valid is that data, and does every situation fit into those census categories neatly and completely? Are there better ways of doing it? Can we look at utility bills? Some communities do that. What are the other ways that we can see what occupancy these residences actually have? There's another category called the other vacant, and a lot of those can be held by overseas investors and they're never used as a home at all. That's a whole nother category. You can see that that's a very small category in Sebastopol compared to the county, compared to the Bay Area as a whole. So Sebastopol's got good control over that, But this is still an issue that's growing larger. So it's something that we need to, keep everyone aware of.
All right, and so Commissioner or Vice Chair Fernandez, when I do the math, the 30% of 143 units is 43 units. And so take out the 20 vacation rentals that we know are out there, you end up with 22 units that are maybe the second homes. And then I believe that number.
Yeah, that
Totally
sounds better
accurate.
than 30%, okay. And then I know there's a lot of data on, the makeup and census demographics of our community. Say as for elder citizens, there are a lot of structures or housing that they wouldn't be able to live in, say it was multi-story, or is that taken into consideration for that age group, or is it just, how is that addressed? I know for disabilities, I guess you'd want to look at wide doors and what's available, but I'm just wondering if you look at, I'm using that as an example. I'm sure it's probably in here in this data somewhere. But just the thought that, we have all this housing, but maybe only a certain number would apply to retirement or to families and so forth.
Yeah, and Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, the special needs housing includes senior housing?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
okay, good.
Seniors are a special needs group, as are persons with disabilities, and seniors tend to have more disabilities and multiple disabilities. The older you are, the more likely you are to have disabilities. So we do have correlations between what kind of housing we have, and we have correlations between what our disabled population, what the features are of our disabled population, but we don't have that direct match of are our disabled citizens living in housing that is inappropriate for them because it's 3-storied or whatever. We don't have that kind of match. That kind of data is too personal to be shared, on that kind of a micro level. But we can see it happening. We know we have an aging housing stock. We know we have an aging population. And so we have to get serious about things like universal design and making units accessible.
Okay. And then with, let's see here, look at my notes. And I know some of the strategies for increasing housing stock is like ADUs. What about as far as conversion? Would that include conversion like of garages or dividing up bigger homes, or creating those? Where is that counted, or how is that looked at?
Those are included within the discussion of ADUs as garage conversions and other converted structures for ADUs. And kind of while we're talking about this discussion of needs, I would like to point out a really helpful part of the full technical background report, though it's a lot to go through. One part I may call everybody's attention to is the section on housing needs. So this is within that long PDF. It starts on PDF page 64, or technical background report page 2, since that goes with all the other appendices. And by each special needs household group, it talks about so if you go down in there at some point, I think on page 5, we hit the analysis on seniors and elderly households. So it talks about here's the existing population and identifies needs and the strategies proposed to address those needs. So that would be a great place also for if you have a population that you are especially looking to make sure that their needs are addressed. Look at the existing analysis on here's what we're proposing, and in your public feedback, say this doesn't look like enough, or this looks like plenty, thank you for including this, or I think you should consider these two. That's a very good place to focus your time.
Right, and
then-
actually,
Go ahead.
the policies related to that group are actually included in that technical report, so you can kind of go through it that way too, if you'd like.
Okay.
There's a question related to plexes, dividing larger units up into individual. You want to, do you recall the policies and programs offhand, Carrie or Elliot?
I do not, but I would say, if the SB 9 regulations, which would allow a duplex, from a single family home, that would be in one of the policies looking at that. I think we did institute a different variety of zoning districts in our last housing element, some of which include duplexes and what used to be single family homes. So there's some additional zoning stuff. And I believe that's the one with the R5 zoning,
Yes.
where we're looking at potentially looking at either the cottage home development, which Cotati has adopted, or looking at potentially additional rezoning our properties R5, which is the smaller lot, but also includes allowing plexes.
And could you go back to that map showing the available areas?
Is that the sites map?
Yeah, I have a question on that.
Sure, hold on, let me pull it up.
Yeah, if you can make
Is
a
this
little
the-
bit, yeah. Keep going. So, so just in general, if I've got this right, in theory, these formulas and how many houses are allocated is based on the area and what is developable in the area. And then they come up with some formula. Is that essentially, kind of in simple terms, how this is all arrived at?
In simple terms, that is, Elliot and Four Leaf did look at it, and I don't know what the metric for sort of a normal site is, what percentage of density of the allowed density you're looking at for them.
So this full analysis is within the section 3, which is around page 70-ish of the housing element report itself, but that contains mostly a site-by-site analysis of the sites that don't already have project proposed on them. And we looked at past development of market rate and affordable developments. And we came up with this number of 85% of maximum density for the market rate developments and around 94% of maximum density for projects with affordable units on them. And we looked at sites that have, say there was one site with a creek setback, so we took that out of the acreage. So yes, the formula is based on past development trends and all those numbers are here, but again, each site and each developer might have different ideas of what to do with things. So they won't be exact numbers, but that's what they're derived from.
Okay. And then just a last question is, I'm looking at the site that's on Valentine Avenue. And now, in the beginning, when they're kind of describing this whole process, religion is included in there as to take it all into consideration. So how is this parcel treated that's owned by the church? And is it considered vacant? Is it considered
So
non?
are you talking?
Yeah.
So this is actually not in our site analysis. I believe it may be because it was in the last and it did not get developed. And so you can't reuse it. It doesn't mean that the church couldn't come forward and develop it, right? This isn't, just to be clear, this map isn't, here's the only place this housing can go. These are the, but I think because it was already included in past and it wasn't developed. And I think the same thing happens with the Robinson Road site
Oh, yeah.
there at the church. I don't believe that's included because that was also included in the last round, and they've chosen to do some garden and playground areas and things like that on their site, not housing.
Okay.
And so those sites have been removed. Not all the sites you saw last time will be in,
Yeah.
in this time.
All right, I think covered my questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, and Commissioner Burns.
Now my questions have been answered. I should have taken my hand down.
And yes, my questions were also answered. Of course, I was concerned about the vacation rental housing, and I looked at the numbers and realized that they weren't as great as they looked on that chart.
Yeah, that bar
But
graph makes it look like we have, I mean, I just calculated Sonoma County's seasonal and vacation and it's 8,600. So
Yeah.
by comparison, so to, it's like our column should be really, really small or so, and the other one should be really fat to have the same height.
Right, which is something that I noticed throughout the entire report, which I love reading. It's so interesting to try to wrap your mind around the topic, the level of affordability and the location. But because our town is so small, it's all so granular. It's just, and it's understandable, which is kind of interesting. If you're talking about tens of thousands, I don't know how people can kind of wrap their minds around it, but it's really nice to be working with a small town. And I did have a question, but it's just slipped my mind. It came up when you were talking about, I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember it now. Yes, the parcels that were taken out because we had used them before, is there a time when they can be brought back in? Is there a time frame for that, or do they just disappear completely?
We can reuse them, but the hoops that we have to jump through to reuse them, they're assumed by HCD to not be suitable. So if we could demonstrate developer interest, that the church was coming in saying, hey, I want to do 50 units of affordable housing here. If we could demonstrate that, we could certainly put the site back in. But HCD is saying, you've been saying it's appropriate for development for the last 16 years. I see nothing on it. It's out. Unless you can demonstrate to us that it's good.
I can understand that, but it does seem very strange to consider annexing and extending infrastructure and planning to do that when you do have these other lots in town, because then it reduces the instinct to develop those sites.
Yep.
So a little bit of a conundrum in my mind.
And it's interesting because I think there's certainly sites that we added because people were talking about, and so I keep a list and so does John of people who contacted us about various stuff, but so there's, you all probably remember from the Benedetti car wash, the Huck Hensley, I believe, owns the site next door. He talked about interest in developing the very large parking lot in the back. And so that we added that to it. So it's like, okay, well, he's interested in it. Let's try to, encourage that and let's include it in the inventory. There's a few other sites that are on here for the same reason. The site that City Ventures did the preliminary review is on here. We have been talking with them again. And I may or may not see them in the audience here. And we just had a pre-application for the site on the vacant site by this is the Murphy Healdsburg construction project on the corner. There is a vacant site that wraps around it, and we just had a pre-app staff level meeting with the potential applicant there. And so all of those sites get added because they are either considered to be in the pipeline now, or they really have a potential and people looking at them seriously. And that, I think, certainly some of those sites, like the church sites are removed. There is a site south of Big O Tires that I don't know, I kind of feel should be on the list, and maybe that's something that it is on our current list, and maybe that's one that makes sense to reuse. Shane, I can probably talk to you about that one.
I think there was that the site that had some toxics on it before?
Yeah.
It had a gas station, but I believe that has the site closure letters for any of the contaminants.
Okay, so
similarly, we added the AmeriGas site because that is, well, frankly, it's now vacant. So that's actually when we probably need to change on the map because that building has been demolished. But because that was bought by someone who's interested, St. Vincent de Paul, they're interested in developing housing there. So that one was added as well. But yeah, this one, and I have been contacted recently by a developer about this one and another site. So there are potential sites that aren't on this list that might develop as well.
And so a couple things, as Carrie mentioned earlier, this doesn't mean these are the sites where housing can go, because housing can go anywhere in the city. Well, almost anywhere in the city. This is just a demonstration to HCD that we have sites with appropriate zoning to accommodate the RHNA that we expect. The other thing is, remember, we have a program for a kind of a B list, an administrative backup list that we can continue every annual planning report, which are due in April every year. Every annual planning report, we can shift around sites. If sites look like they're not going to develop after all, but these guys look like they're going to develop, then we can put them on the sites inventory list. So for the first time, that sites inventory is going to be truly dynamic, and it has to be what's truly available and ready for development throughout the 8-year housing element period. And that's a lot different than what it's been in the past. You made a list and you walked away. And, you know, as times change and sites develop, nobody changed the list. So that's going to be different now. So this is kind of a snapshot in time, and 2 years from now, it could be different.
Yeah. Any more questions of staff and the consultants today? Well, seeing none, I believe I should open the public hearing. Is that correct, Carrie? Do you have anything else to?
Yes.
To-
No, I think that's great.
Workshop, not a hearing.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it's a public comment.
Oh, public comment. Thank you.
All right, I see Callum Weeks, and Callum, can you see the 3-minute timer?
There's a timer.
There is a timer on the screen, but we can also tell you when your 3 minutes are up. That's fine. too.
I don't see a timer. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
Perhaps we
Hello.
can pick the- Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Hello, everyone. Callum Weeks, Policy Director with Generation Housing, where we advocate for more and more affordable and more diverse housing. Just a handful of things, most of which I'll reserve for offline with the staff at Four Leaf. And by the way, I want to thank everyone for working on this. I know it's a lot of work. It's a heavy lift, and I really appreciate your dedication to making this come to life and you know, getting this across the finish line. The one thing I wanted to call attention to, and this might be semantics, but under missing middle housing on PDF page 59, it says that the city will increase opportunities for small lot single family homes such as tiny homes and cottage court housing developments. Now, yes, cottage court housing developments, if you go to missingmiddlehousing.com, are traditionally part of that missing middle housing stock that is, you know, more often than not proposed. But tiny homes, I mean, usually tiny homes are between 100 and 400 square feet. Whereas, and if that's Huntley Square, well, Huntley Square, I think, is around 500 square feet. So what I guess I'm getting at is I think the language there maybe needs to be a little bit more expanded, or it needs to be a little bit more, or just maybe better articulated in terms of what you're discussing, because personally, I don't know if a tiny home would necessarily count as that missing middle housing. It's really more about the plex time housing that we've been discussing, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage court housing. So I just wanted to call attention to that. And then in terms of, you know, actually expanding the portfolio or the zoning opportunities in terms of like the actual missing middle housing itself, are we talking about converting, you know, 5% of the single family zoned, you know, parcels to R5 designation, 10%? Maybe that's a little bit granular right now, and maybe that's a conversation for offline, but I just kind of want to see if we can get a better sense of what that will look like. Obviously, missing middle housing is a kind of a front of mind issue, especially if we want to keep our families and our workforce here. So I just really wanted to drill down into this and make sure we create the absolute perfect conditions to ensure these units are built over the next 6 cycle. And then I think I will reserve most of my other comments later. I do, because I know she's here and she's going to say something, just want to say Community Land Trust is great. I think we need to throw as much resources at the Land Trust as we possibly can. If we want to create affordable housing that's for purchase, the Community Land Trust is one of the best ways we can go. So I'd just like to really emphasize the importance around us really focusing in on that. And 15 seconds left. I am mildly concerned potentially about monitoring of affordable housing. I think we really need to focus on that. And you saw the grand jury report. I'm sure I would just like to emphasize that so we can discuss it a little more. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Callum. Next, we have Caitlin Garfield. Caitlin, can you see the 3-minute timer?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right, please go ahead with your comment.
Great, thank you. So yeah, my name is Caitlin Garfield. I'm housing administrator with Housing Land Trust Sonoma County. We don't have actually too much to say tonight. We're more here to say thank you so much for including the first time homebuyer program. We're very excited about that. And also thank you to Cal for just pointing out the importance of having home ownership that is affordable. I know often that there's a focus on affordable renters, and that is just as important, but there also does need to be that stepping stone to affordable home ownership so that households can build that equity and build wealth and continue to pass that on both to the generations of their families and to other families as well. So that's why we do really want to emphasize just the importance of creating affordable home ownership and also using a model that makes those units affordable in perpetuity. So again, thank you so much. You guys have just been amazing partners on this, and we are very excited about this new housing element. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. And it's been a pleasure working with the Land Trust as well. But any other public comments? I know I probably shouldn't be responding to public comments, but they have been a great partner. Okay, I do not see any other public comments, Kathy.
Okay, I will close the public comment period. Is there, I guess there are no answers to be for any questions. So I guess we'll move on. Is there any commission discussion, or should we move forward to a motion to adopt this draft?
And you don't actually adopt this draft right now. We're just taking public input on it. We actually have to, between this and city council, we will be doing the same presentation next Tuesday, taking public comment through August 20th. And then, yeah, I think we might have said the 22nd, since the 20th is a Saturday and none of us are going to be compiling comments on the Saturday. And then we'll have a couple of weeks to incorporate those comments into the document, including what we heard tonight. And then we have to ship that off to HCD for their review. Once they've reviewed it, we'll need to make any corrections. Then it will be coming to the city for adoption.
Okay.
So that will probably be the January-ish timeframe.
Okay. Well, thank you. It was really interesting to read that document. It's just always fascinating to understand all those components of it.
Thank you. And it looks like we have a couple of commissioners with additional comments.
Yes, Commissioner Fernandez?
Yeah, just was wondering, like, did you get the information that you were wanting to, or comments or opinions? And just in summary, what I'm just curious as to what you did get out of this discussion and meeting and information. What did it boil down to? We talked a lot of things, mostly questions, and I don't know which.
Sure. No, actually, I'm surprised that you guys didn't want to talk about the sites more. I will say that. I was all prepared to do that. And you're right, it is such a small town that it's like I know every site intimately, and so does John at this point. So I'm surprised we didn't have more of that. But no, I think it's, I think if I can actually pull it up, because I know Elliot will probably be happy if I do. Looking at the fair housing issues, I think there's a couple of things for me that in some ways we're such a small town, it's a little difficult. And I grew up in a town of 5,000 and there was no bad side of town. There's no good side. It's just the town, right? And Sebastopol's a little bit like that. Some of these fair housing issues were being compared to the larger Bay Area, which is a little odd because we don't have the same kind of transit and those types of resources. But I think some of the things that are here, and the issues that Four Leaf pulled out, which I really appreciate, neighborhoods at risk of becoming exclusive. I know that's something that the city has you know, and the population here is really concerned about is making sure that, you know, kids can have young, you know, as Callum said, the next generation can live here, but also the seniors can age in place and that there's places for them when their, you know, finances are tighter. So I think I really appreciate that. And, you know, I look at the issues that they've outlined, the access to financing for small sites. That's certainly something that I've tried to emphasize. And that we also heard from all the housing developers, affordable housing developers last year, is that no, you know, the smaller sites, the smaller infill is really difficult to do because of the tax credit structure. But looking at other ways with the CDC to get financing. And then, you know, looking at the displacement due to high housing costs. And I know that's certainly one the city with vacation rental policy. You know, we can't control rents, but we can control the limiting, you know, the loss of housing stock. And that's definitely an interest of the planning department as well as the city as a whole. And then, yeah, limited, making sure we have the availability and the range of sizes. I think, you know, I'm not surprised that I'm hearing from the commission on those, but I think it is definitely, those are all nuts that we're interested in cracking. Similarly on the fair housing enforcement outreach, again, it's a smaller town. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to do some of these things. There's 2 planners in the planning department for a lot of different things. But at the same time, it's we do definitely coordinate well with the CDC, and they've been great partners, especially under David Kiff as he starting some of the programs up again that had lapsed. So
From my perspective on that, I think just hearing the questions is really instructive, because if you guys have read the document and you still have a question, that means we haven't covered everything that we need to cover. So that's always very helpful to me. But the other thing is, I want to emphasize, this is just the very beginning of that public input process. So it's really, really important that you guys help us and you share this on your Facebook pages and your whatever Instagram or whatever things you have, and you get those links out there on social media, and you really encourage people to get involved. This thing is going to live through 2031. And, you know, that this is the opportunity.
And would like to reiterate Jane's comment there that it's very helpful. And one of the things that I got out of this again was the sections that may need to get explained a little better. We've spent the better part of the last year working through this data and this information, and it can be very easy once you get all bogged down in the data to just forget to explain where it came from. So really appreciating your comments and bringing light to that information.
Commissioner Fritz, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I actually do have some additional comments about specific policies and items in the document I'd like to go over. I want to start with table 9, which is, I realize this is the kind of status of the current cycle's implementation of the programs, but I think there's some things in there that, for example, item A4.
what page is that? I can pull that
This
up.
is page 29 of the document.
Thanks.
So item A4 is assess city-owned parking lots for possible use, and it says program's not achieved. And I feel like this is something that should be continued, even though there was a specific city parking lot that was looked at and the city council kind of abandoned it. I feel like these are important resources of the city. And as we heard from our affordable housing presentations last year, you know, several of the developers talked about, you know, we really need city partnership. And we obviously all know our city's affordable housing fund is not particularly robust. And this is one way that the city can help an affordable housing developer, not even just parking lots, but other city-owned properties where they can have some kind of, you know, they can have some kind of agreement with an affordable housing developer to either sell it or lease it to them for very little money. And then that becomes a huge resource for an affordable housing developer. I'm working on a project in Cloverdale that was exactly that. It's an affordable housing project on city-owned land. And so I feel like this is something that we should continue to monitor and be aware of possible partnership opportunities by using city-owned property, including parking lots. So I don't want to abandon this, and I hope this gets incorporated into the final document.
And Commissioner Fritz, are there, one of the things, because there is new legislation regarding surplus city land as well. I did review the city-owned land, and we don't have a lot of excess land. So parking lots aside, we have a lot of land that's in the floodplain in the Laguna, which is mostly open space. And then we have parks throughout town, but we actually don't have a lot of surplus land. I think the one place that, depending on how it goes is, which isn't the city, but the high school has the Laguna campus. And if they were to abandon that as part of the consolidation, that's an area where I thought, well, teacher housing. But that is kind of one of the issues that I was sort of looking at with this. And then I think one of the things that Jane, for better or worse, has impressed on me is that anytime you put a program in, HCD no longer allows you to consider something. You have to actually do it. And given the city's, I know the Pine Grove Square parking lot was the one that was considered that you're discussing. There were a lot of concerns by businesses who paid the in lieu fee at some point in the past for the construction of that parking lot. And we're pretty adamant about taking that away. I don't think, it doesn't mean that we can't do things. And I actually talked with a developer the other day about, a site that was adjacent to a city parking lot. And, I said, well, it might be something that, like, if the city parking lot isn't being used at night, it could help supplement for the development potentially. I mean, it's something that would need to be approved by the planning commission, but so I think we can still do things to that extent or could pursue them, but I do have concerns about including it as a program because we can't say assess or consider anymore.
Well,
I get that. Go, Jane.
We can certainly do things that are not in the housing element. The problem is that the state now considers programs to be a contract between the jurisdiction and the state. And if the same thing happens again and we say, hey, we're going to keep this program as it was and we're going to go ahead and do that, and then nothing happens, then we could be in trouble with the state. I did want to mention though, and it should be reflected in this table, so I think we should make a note that one of the things that we talked about with this program was continuing it sort of with the workforce housing overlay, where we would allow that to be placed on city properties, including parking lots where they're available, to make that more available for housing. So we should be reflecting that in here. See, every time you have a question, I see something I need to change.
So Jane, you're saying add it to A4 that this is also being remapped to the
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great.
I think that's a good way of maintaining that too, Paul.
Yeah. Well, and I guess in some of my other comments, maybe in a similar vein, and I understand the housing element piece of it, but there's things that I don't want to lose sight of as a commission or just as a community. And this is another one I brought up on numerous occasions, and everyone's probably sick of me hearing me talk about it, but and maybe this is a little bit related to the workforce housing overlay idea, but the idea that we need a use permit to do 100% housing projects in the CO zone, I find crazy. And even the CG zone, I would, put that in there as well. But I mean, the CO zone, there's so many 100% housing projects in that zone already, and I don't know why we would require a use permit for those. I don't know how again, we don't want to necessarily commit to that because it may not pass or whatever, but I just don't want to lose sight of that idea. Housing by right is so much easier for a developer to swallow than having to get a use permit. And I really think that's a limiting factor. And that's, that property that you mentioned, Carrie, next to Big O Tire is in that zone. And so if you develop that, you either have to get a use permit for 100% housing, or you have to make it a mixed use project. And personally, I would love to see that developed as 100% housing. And I think it would be easier for a developer to swallow that if they didn't have to get a use permit in order to do that.
Paul, pardon my intrusion.
No, it's okay.
What would you think of a rule that says you have to get a use permit, except that use permit would be waived if you provide at least 20% of your units as affordable or lower?
I think that's okay. I think it depends on the property. One of my issues with inclusionary is if it's a small property and you can only do 7 units or 8 units, making 20% of them affordable also doesn't make sense. So I think on a bigger property where you can get 30 or 40 units, that might pencil, but I'm concerned that, that's something I just have a concern about. Inclusionary housing, I think, is discouraging for small lots because, I've talked to developers about properties in Sebastopol where you can get like 10 or 12 units, and even to do 20% of those or 15% of those as inclusionary, they can't do it. And so the project doesn't, we don't get any units in that case. So, and that's why, one of the reasons Huntley Square was developed in the way it was, because we do have this exception for small units. But so, obviously it's complicated. There's many layers, and from a developer standpoint, the less complication, the more guarantee, the more likely they are to do something. And that's
so
also
Paul, so sorry, Paul, for on that. So we do allow, so you're talking about trying to get market rate housing on those sites, because we already do allow affordable housing projects permitted without a use permit. Okay.
Yeah, but
or mixed use where there's something else on the first floor is also allowed.
And this is just, in my daydreams, because I've talked about the cottage housing idea as well. And I think that site in particular next to Big O Tire could be a nice cottage housing development. It's a decent size, it's flat, but, cottage housing with, retail or commercial space doesn't really make sense. And also to do a cottage housing, the affordable component, because that's not a huge property, you might be able to get, I don't know how big it is exactly, but anyway, that's kind of related, I think. And so to that, and I don't know if this was I don't remember seeing this specifically, maybe it was somewhere. And maybe, again, we don't want to put it in here because then we have to commit to doing it. But where did I have it? Oh, policy A3, there's kind of a list of things. And I thought one of them could be a cottage housing ordinance idea. That's on page 47 of the document. It talks about missing middle housing, workforce housing overlay zone, accessory dwelling units. And I just was thinking, adding a cottage housing ordinance to that, I think would be helpful. I mean, the way that would happen now is we'd have to do a PC, probably, or a small lot subdivision. But again, I think a cottage housing ordinance that allows it kind of clearly by right with specific development standards, maybe more attractive to a developer.
I believe if you go to the actual program, it does, and this is actually one that Mr. Weeks had commented on. We do actually talk about, looking at cottage court housing, cottage developments. So, so that is also included in that.
Okay, great. And then program, actually, that same one. You mentioned identifying additional sites for R5 zoning. I think that's great because right now we have like 9, I think, which is not super helpful. So that's good. Let's see. Oh, this is just a clarification, because there's a references to annual or biannual housing expos, and there's references to it both ways, annual and biannual, and I don't think we actually even do them that frequently. So I don't know if we want to commit to doing one biannually or annually, but there's it just sort of mentions several different ways in the document. So I think pick one or the other, just to make it consistent.
Right,
I
and
thought that
that's
was a great
actually when
idea.
I talked with Elliot about, because there's sort of a couple of different versions. One is the big housing fair we have that Commissioner Fritz, I know you took part in, that had the head of Permit Sonoma, the head of the Sonoma County CDC, the head of SURE Sonoma County, the head of myself and Supervisor Hopkins. So it's and I think Mayor Slater was there.
Yeah.
So it's like a pretty big production
Yeah,
and
it
really
was.
costly. I do not think we could, and I think Holly Hansen would kill me if I said we were going to do this every year, because it was her job to reorganize that whole thing.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
thought that was ambitious. So I just wanted to sort of clarify exactly what we were intending by that, because that
Yeah,
wasn't-
I don't think it means that it needs to be something of that scale. It is up to the city, it could be a special meeting or a workshop where we're talking about updates to housing laws, part of the education of the community, as well as the decision makers. And we're talking about the various sites and potential sites and things like that. So but I think, the intent of that, and Elliot and Jane, please speak up. The intent of the housing workshop is partially to be education to people who might be interested in doing housing on the homeowner level or on the developer level.
So, like Carrie mentioned, there's kind of the housing fair, there's the housing workshop, and we've got several different actions that we're trying to fit into those. So trying to see what fits best where and the best way to plan for that need while also committing to something that the city can commit to. So we'll take that input and
Not overcommit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I thought that was going to be ambitious, because that was a big deal.
I was there too.
Yeah, that's true. Jane was there as well. And I think there's a lot of different ways that, and I do want to just express for those who might be in the audience, but also just remind commissioners that we do a lot of things just because it's of people's interests or it's the right thing to do. So like, it's not in our housing element, but we had that whole affordable housing developer forum last spring where we had 6 or 8 different housing developers come and talk with the planning commission. The RV safe parking site, the Project Home Key, none of those were in our housing element. The micro shelters up at the community church that you approved for a temporary use for 5 years. Those aren't in the quantifiable dynamics. You don't get credit for those in a number calculation way in your housing element. The city's doing them because they're the right thing to do, and the community church and others in the community are doing them. So there's a lot of stuff outside of the housing element that we will continue to do. So part of this is, hey, and there's definitely some stuff in here like working with Land Trust to try to get a first timer home buyer program up and running. Absolutely, and let's take credit for some of those things, but we do know that there's going to be things that come up. Just as a matter of course that we don't, like the 2 RV spaces at Park Village through the homeless emergency funding. That wasn't in our housing element, but we got the grant and we built the units and they're there. So
Yeah, and I think, again, this doesn't need to be in the housing element, but just thinking about the housing expo idea or housing workshops or whatever, it'd be nice to sort of have like a rotating topics. Like one year we do ADUs, 1 year we do SB9, how to do an SB9 lot split, how to,
interesting.
just kind of, there could be a variety of topics that kind of rotate and might hit different people and, in terms of education. but it'd be nice to have some kind of ongoing community outreach education component that we kind of evolve.
Absolutely.
And then getting into this, I do have a couple comments about sites, but not questioning which sites are where, but there's just 7765 Healdsburg Avenue was used twice. I just didn't know if the address was right or if that meant was intentional. That's on page 80.
One is Healdsburg Ave, one is Bodega Ave.
Oh, you're right.
I confused those a
That's
lot.
coincidence.
It
I did look at that.
I definitely tripped those up a couple times, so
Yeah. Okay.
glad to
never
see it
mind.
wasn't just me.
Yeah, I missed that too. And then actually on page, I don't know where that page was. I don't put the page down. It's table 20. It's page 82. This is the recent impending projects. I thought the Barlow Crossing townhomes, isn't that that's in the downtown core, so shouldn't that max density be 25?
That density, yeah, there were a couple of corrections on there that I think you're right, that should be 25.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and that's actually the one where I think the last housing element had like 30 or 36 units. But it's in a floodplain, so that's, yeah, it's not, that's the difference between a restricted site and an unrestricted site. Where that's 68%.
Yeah. Okay, and then, so I think you answered this earlier, but this workforce housing overlay. So that's an idea that we would either pick specific sites, or a developer could come, if we develop a workforce housing overlay, a developer could ask for it to be applied to a specific site. And if that's the case, would that be processed as a zoning amendment or something? Or like a zone change where you had a site and you said, I want this housing overlay, then we go through the planning commission as a zoning amendment, or how does that work exactly?
Correct. It would be just like rezoning. If the city does it, it'd be like when we created the R5, where we're proposing what areas and some of them, as Jane said, they might be the commercial office zones. You might just sort of think about those as or select parts of them or something like that. We did discuss with council, and there was some concern about the cost to the city to try to do that effort for developers to develop all the sites and do the CEQA for all the sites as part of that zoning overlay, as opposed to, and obviously when something is in your zoning code, you can request it to be added, yes, through a zoning amendment. And I don't, what those parameters are. It's I think we certainly want it to be helpful, and that's where I kind of see the conjunction with the commercial office as a potential way to facilitate some of those sites that we've discussed. And actually, even at our kickoff meeting with the joint city council planning commission meeting, there was some question about some of those commercial office zones. Jane, do you have any additions to that? You look like you might. You look like you want to talk.
Do I have that look? Oh my. That's frightening. Yeah, so the important first step is to get it adopted into the code, of course, and then developers can use it as the city is going through those processes. And I'm hoping that an opportunity will come up where we can get the CEQA done. I know there's been a big push on the part of many of the collaborative leaders to get ABAG to give us that kind of resource so that we can get rezonings done and upzone for housing all across the Bay Area. But that is such a huge stumbling block, especially for small jurisdictions, to get that CEQA done. So let's get it adopted into the code. Hopefully that's what we'll end up doing with it, but we've got to get over that CEQA hurdle.
And then this is just a, kind of a graphic or typo thing, but on page 88, there's just something, it says like reference not found. I don't know, it's like a missing link in
The things that you notice right after pressing upload, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing those out. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Anything else? Oh, and this is just a kind of, again, a kind of a clarification, a question. So this is program A 1.2 on page 50. No reduction of density without replacement sites. So does that mean, for example, like the Barlow Crossing, they didn't develop to their full maximum density? So you have to, if they, they were maximum density is 36 units, they only built 18 units. Does that mean you have to have 18 units someplace else to back that in?
That's the no net loss law, and that's why it's important that we always have a buffer, because you don't want to be put in a position where you can't approve a good project because you don't have the 6 units that they couldn't put in or something. And also a reason why it's important to have realistic development assumptions in the housing element to begin with.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why some of those, the more conservative percentage, the 85% or whatever, you don't have to do it at full capacity if it just doesn't make sense with the site.
And I think this is my last question. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a lot. But I know, Village Park, I think, is included as an affordable, housing but the Oler Furcrest Mobile Home Park is not. Is that because the city didn't buy it, the city doesn't own it, it's privately owned, so that's not, we don't have control over it. So even though, mobile homes are generally affordable, we can't really count that as anything.
Right, it's a privately owned, Furcrest Mobile Home site is privately owned, and yeah, you got it. It's the city doesn't have control over what those are. Now, Jane, there is legislation on mobile home regulations at the state level, or no, in terms of preserving mobile home?
I mean, pending legislation?
Yeah, or anything that restricts rental rates and things like that.
There are some, the city of Sebastopol's in a different situation because it has the purview over its mobile home parks, which is very rare.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which makes
But
sense.
yes,
because
unless
we own one of them.
unless there was potential to expand the mobile home park without like encroaching further into the Laguna de Santa Rosa, then yeah, there's no reason to put it in there.
Okay, thanks for humoring me. I think that was all I have for now. There's a lot here.
Wonderful review. Wonderful review, Commissioner Fritz. Thank you.
Yep.
And as a reminder to Commissioner Fritz and everybody else on the call, we've got another almost a month left to provide comments. So anything you didn't get to today, we'll still be listening to later on in the
Yes.
review period.
Yes, please go ahead and just send them directly to me.
Okay. So thank you very much for the presentation, and Carrie for all the work that you've done on this as well.
Thank you, Elliot and Jane, and we'll be seeing you next week.
Oh yeah. Okay, thanks. Take care.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a second item. Do we need to take a little break, or are we okay to move forward with the Planning Commission work plan?
So I
We could
would
go ahead.
say
Comment.
the work plan itself, I think, is a pretty quick item, because it's reviewing something you've already reviewed a couple of times. That probably, it depends upon whether you all want to do a training tonight or bump that to the next, to a future meeting. Because I believe the training video, if you were to watch that, is bump me out of the course thing. I think it's about a 60-minute training for the next session.
8 o'clock now. I for one am across from Seattle, and we're having a heat wave, and I'm kind of in a very hot room. Fan. Like if I turn on the AC, I'll never be able to hear anything because it's pretty loud.
I don't
So
mind just doing the work plan and pushing the training off. And
Yep.
that would be,
Okay.
okay. Then, does anyone need to quit or can we go on to the work plan?
Okay.
No comments, okay, we'll move on. Deborah?
Oh, I was just
you
saying,
want-
that's all.
Okay, then we'll move on to the work plan. Carrie?
All right, thank you. And so this is actually the edited version. We had talked about this updates to the planning commission work plan back in March and had an update of all of the finished projects. And I can note that we can also include our local hazard mitigation plan as finished because FEMA has now accepted it. So with the number of things done, we did look at our next year or two. There were edits at the May 24th meeting, those including some that we needed to do offline. Those are now done. And so we have the final work plan as well as a resolution for you to consider recommending that the city council review and approve your work plan to help guide and prioritize our work for the next couple of years. And I won't go through the work plan again since you've already discussed it twice, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to bring those up.
Paul, you look like you had a question? No? Anyone? Ever? You're muted.
Try this again. On page 5, under the last item, joint PC meeting action. I feel this is really important. I don't know if the rest of the commissioners feel, but it seems kind of like endeavor to hold at least one joint, like, hey, if you get a chance or if this happens, I think it should be a little more, hold one public, at least one public between city council plan, first quarter of the year or something that makes it a little bit more likely to happen. I have participated in the past. I thought they were really helpful, even just to create communication and understanding, where we're kind of heading and coordinate efforts and know what kinds of things we need to kind of, educate ourselves on. But it just seems kind of like pretty weak. And I'd like it to be a little more, to be stronger, to hopefully that it happens on an annual basis. Also, I think I've talked about this before, but I think it's important to continue to consider what future maintenance liabilities, projects cost, or when we're reviewing something, it should be part of the review process. What is it? What's going to cost in labor, maintenance, funding? Where's that funding going to come from? Rather than just continue to do things and then have stuff go either disrepaired or just not have the manpower for that. So I don't know if that's going to be something on there. And then I'm probably not, it's not necessarily appropriate for our discussion here regarding the vacation rentals, but I think we're missing opportunity to coordinate promotion and people visiting our town through vacation rentals to patronize our town and to shop here and do a kind of a coordinate effort. I know that used to be, I think the chamber used to have like a welcoming basket for people that moved in. But I try to encourage and list things in town that people can do, and oftentimes they'll walk there, they'll consider that rather than getting in their car and driving some far away. So I think that's just an opportunity to put it on there. And also under the parkland, let's see, where was that? Where we review. Saw it on here, 1 second. About the parks. Where's that section?
So it might be on page 2. That's the Ives Park Master Plan.
Yeah.
Park and Rec
So
Plan.
Yeah, one thing I think is important to add on there is to include getting reports from organizations or entities that rent or lease space, like for example, the Scottsville Little League, so it's not forgotten. You just kind of have the status of that. And I think that's all I have.
Okay, anyone else? Any more questions on the work plan?
Okay, if there's no more questions, if I could just respond to Vice Chair Fernandez on a couple of the items for
Okay.
consideration. So I think I'll start in reverse order. I think it's probably under Ives Park Master Plan implementation to include receive regular reports from park entity users or something like that. That would be the Little League, or if it's the pool or others. I know Kathy had mentioned the Weisman Hall.
It
stuff
should be
as
in the
well.
lease.
Yeah. Leasers, yeah. I agree with you. It's initially concept, but probably not the right place to put the promotional stuff for vacation rentals, because that policy is kind of talking about, yeah. And then I think the other thing regarding the joint plan, that language is straight out of the general plan, the endeavor to hold for that action item. But I do hear what you're saying. Let's try to make it actually more regular. We did have one September of last year as the kickoff for the housing element and to talk about housing issues. I could certainly see one in the coming year for, it could be the housing element again and some of the priority issues there as well in terms of kicking off the implementation of that.
And then what do you think about as far as the maintenance and the projects that are approved, and just always kind of kicking the can down the road of worrying about the maintenance later?
So I think, thank you. I would add that under, there's a park master plan section. So you have needs assessment. This is sort of just description. Financial planning and funding sources, CIP planning are also mentioned, but I think, yeah, maintenance needs and requirements for new and existing facilities. We can expand on that to say maintenance requirements for new and existing improvements should be considered whenever looking at capital improvement plan.
Great. Perfect.
And so it sounds like Vice Chair Fernandez has suggested two additions for item 6 on the screen to include receive reports. And actually, maybe this should go into the master plan anyway, because it's not just Ives Park, but receive report from park leasers, regular reports, and then maintenance needs and requirements for new and existing facilities should be considered whenever reviewing CIP projects. Or potential.
I think we should even have physical visits to the parks, at least on an annual basis, to see what's going on. And it's a little different than, than just kind of getting the reports. And it gets us outside.
Okay, so at this point, do we need to vote to approve the resolution with those 2 additions? Oh, excuse me.
Yes, that would be, sorry.
I was just gonna say that I'm fine with the additions that Everett suggested. And I would like to make a motion to approve this resolution as presented in the work plan as presented with the modifications suggested by Everett. And recommend, approve the resolution to recommend the work plan be reviewed and approved by the city council.
I'll go ahead and second that.
All right, and
Okay.
Chair Andrew, can we make sure we take any public comment as well? Sorry, We missed that one.
Oh, thank you. Yes, before we vote on this, is there public comment at this time? Please raise your hand to indicate you wish to speak.
Okay, and I can note that we have not received
My hand's
any
up.
written comments. And I do not see anyone with their hand raised, so thank you, Chair Ottinger.
Thank you. Then, Carrie, would you call the vote?
Absolutely. Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly, Commissioner Kelly, you're muted.
I thought I was unmuted. Yes, and it's a lofty plan, but it's good. It reflects what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. Commissioner Fritz,
Aye.
Vice Chair Fernandez,
Aye.
and Chair Ottinger.
Aye.
Thank you. That passes unanimously, and I do have this tentatively scheduled for the September 6th City Council meeting right after Labor Day.
Okay.
I was hoping you guys would pass this. I just I want to get it to them quickly. So thank you.
Okay, then are there subcommittee updates? Seeing none at this time, then we'll move on to the planning director's report. Carrie, do you have some things for us?
I do. We've had a few fun activities in the last week. Speaking of getting out to the parks, both the library sculpture had its grand opening with the artists, a really fun evening last Wednesday, and Ice Park Sculpture Garden had its final installations and ribbon cutting on Saturday. It was a great festivities with the Youth Chamber Orchestra from Santa Rosa playing, and the artists were all there and gave some talks. Actually, a couple were not able to make it, but most of the artists were there, and quite a few people. So it was nice to see. And so if you have not been down there, every single sculpture pad is now filled. So, and they will be on display through next July. Our public art committee will then do, at some point, they will do another call for replacing those sculptures as a sort of a rotating basis. Another park question, this is actually kind of a question for the commission. The Libby Park duck pond fencing is being replaced. Right now, the replacement is for galvanized chain link, and I know we have gotten a lot of, yeah, that's okay. Would you like me to work with the public works superintendent? I did note, I think the planning park commission might have an issue with that. They probably would be okay with the black chain link, because that's what is around, that's what's out at Ives Park, and it's much less chain link fancy. And I can just see from at least the two faces, I can see that is probably something you want me to continue to work
Or
on.
green?
And
Can it be a green? Or at least consider something other than. Or what other, I don't know what other options there are.
Can it be kind of more of a hog wire, something a little bit more, looks like not just chain link? I mean, I know that might be a little more expensive, but
I think it's more that is infinitely more climbable than chain link. But I do hear you, and
I climbed chain link all the time as a kid. It's very climbable. It's very climbable.
And I know
It's
the
like
vertical
all.
have.
okay,
just
I will
wonder if it-
continue to work with the public works superintendent, but yeah, sorry, what was
If
that?
there were some
Chair?
if there were some estimates for some other options, the community might be able to raise the money for that. I know I'm not volunteering to run that program, but it did happen for some other projects. If we knew what that was going to be, what the cost might be, the cost difference.
Right, and so I did ask for the cost between the galvanized chain link and black, and I suspect green would probably be the same on that, and the. Let's see. So the budget for it is 25,000. If they were to use all black powder coated, the cost is about 34,000, so that's a $9,000 difference basically.
Boy,
How long is that fence gonna be there?
Probably as long
Perhaps.
as, if not longer than the last one. It's
What is it
It's-
now? Is it, what is it now?
it is more of a hog wire kind of a thing. It's not chain link.
I didn't think so.
well. It's sad. I do remember a wood frame. Will it have the wood frame or just the metal and the,
No, it would just be the black powder coated
chain link posts?
chain link fence, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, thankfully the public works superintendent did ask, because he said that there have been complaints about the look of chain link, and so I kind of responded and said, yeah, I think there probably is going to be some concern about that. I will see if we
Yeah,
can
I mean,
switch off on it till we can see have further discussion.
I mean, even
I
if
know
it
he's
was-
concerned. Sorry.
well, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at pictures of it. It's a wood, it looks like it's wood frame with probably hog wire. Is what
Yeah,
it is now.
yeah.
Chain link is just so horrid.
Chain-
And I would, if it has to be chain link and we can get it black or a color, I vote for black over any other color. Just because
me
it
too.
tends to disappear a little bit. If you do it
Yeah,
green or another color, it's just gonna jump out more.
Yeah, there is
Yeah, I
a
think-
really high-end, dark black, blackish green that hides the most, but I can understand we don't need to do that. But yeah, it just seems like if the city were asked to come up with $9,000.
Wow.
What
I mean, it's
fun.
spread
I
over
like-
the-
Yeah, but-
Either, and considering we're spending 95,000 for an outdoor shower, I think, 9,000 not so bad.
Yeah, that's to get rid of the outdoor shower at Ives Park and put that money into this fence.
And have a lot left over.
And have money left
Or
over.
Dante has been so good with asking some of the other nonprofit organizations if they can come up for the difference. I know he has relationships with them.
yeah, I know the Rotary did a lot of the fundraising for the playground there, so it's.
I wonder if the
Right.
Public Arts Committee might have any other suggestions or any way to kind of soften it, or I don't know. But I guess
Yeah,
it's basically just other options there may be, or
I think before we give,
Which is-
we-
Oh, sorry, Deborah.
oh, I just think before we give up and put in one of those options, we should think about what you said, putting it out to the community, maybe fundraising, maybe the Rotary, just see what we can do, because wait, there is something about the chain link in the chat.
I'm wondering if the current fence is in a very dilapidated state that it could hold on for a while, or is it just a process that it's come up on the calendar for replacement?
It is, yeah, it's not about liability or anything like that. It is because it is old, it's the old dilapidated fencing, and so he's trying to improve it by replacing the fencing with newer.
Is it something that can be repaired at all rather than replaced?
I think once wood starts to rot, let me check with Dante and talk with him about it, and I
You can
guess the
tell we're
question I
all
would-
not
The
thrilled
question
about
I can sense the lack of excitement, absolutely. The question I probably shouldn't ask, but I would is, do you have concerns if we were just not fence it? I don't know what I don't know if the liability, if the city would be okay with that. It is directly adjacent to a preschool in the Garzot building and the super playground, which is for younger kids. So I do have some concerns with that compared to if it were sort of in a different place, but.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of feel like water is for kids to play in. I would hate the fence around the Ives Creek, little grassy area next to the creek, like the little
Right.
picnic spot next to the creek you can't access because apparently it's, even though we can go to the beach and go to the ocean, we can't stand next to a pond that's probably 18 inches deep in a city park, but.
Right,
I
I will
love that
ask the question because I grew up in a place where nothing has fences, so
Yeah.
like no one's backyards were fenced, so the
plenty of
kids all just
parks-
ran amok.
There's plenty of parks in the world that do not have fences around the ponds.
Yeah,
Okay,
another
I will
idea.
bring
is-
that up. We have a staff meeting tomorrow. I will bring it up at that and see if it's needed.
Are there liability issues that we,
I'm sure Larry will tell us if there are.
Yeah, I think what we heard from, and I don't know if it's a man-made park. I think there is some difference if it's man-made versus like the big, retaining walls at Ives at Calder Creek is different than if it's a layup with, natural layup, which is what we're looking at for Calder Creek. And I believe Ann Riley had said that some of the liability stuff did change a number of years ago. So I imagine it may have been put up for liability, but it sounds like some of that has changed in regards to natural features in a park.
Right, and
spring
she was
break,
also
spring-
saying, that if, as long as there's a barrier fence to keep strollers and bicycles from inadvertently falling in, or people from inadvertently falling into because they're running, that could be sufficient in a lot of cases. So that might be something to look at there.
Interesting.
Because I
Okay.
remember my kids getting
I mean,
pollywogs. I don't know if they climb.
Juilliard Park has water fence around it. Spring Lake has water that's not fenced. The lake in Howarth Park isn't fenced. I mean, there's so many bodies of
Yeah.
water that are in parks that don't quite get that need.
Laguna.
The Laguna is not fenced.
Okay, I will bring that. Thank you all for your input on that impromptu
Thank you.
response
Thank
to
you for
my
sharing that
planning
with
director report unagendized, but I did want to make sure that we had some community input on that. So, and thank
And I
you,
just want to throw out there,
Kyle, for your comments in the chat. I did note them as well.
I just want to throw out there, since we're talking about this park, I was in Benicia over the weekend and they had a super park structure that was like the old super park that was, it made me nostalgic for the old super park structure. Because they
You
still
mean
have
with
one.
wood
It
and
was
not
so cool.
plastic?
Yeah, no, the one they
Yes.
took down because it was toxic.
The one they took down, but they still have one in Benicia, and it just made me nostalgic for that.
Oh, we raised the funds for that. We did so much work for that. I'm nostalgic for it too.
Anyway, sorry.
All right, I'm going to bring us back to the planning director report. So that's it for the park updates that I have. Although I believe your next meeting will have Calder Creek presentation at it. So that is, we're getting close to getting the hydrology report for that as well. So that's coming up. Other things that have happened, the council did adopt the climate action framework at their meeting last Tuesday. So that is now an adopted document. As I noted, the local hazard mitigation plan, which we sent off to FEMA for final approval, they have approved that. We will be working on a general plan amendment to incorporate that into our safety element, but that should be a pretty pretty obvious thing to do, so it shouldn't be a huge issue in terms of what a general plan amendment can be. The next Tuesday's city council meeting, we will be having a couple of presentations, one, the housing element presentation you all just heard, as well as the Habitat for Humanity Townhomes final hearing. And then a couple other miscellaneous items. The Lowell Sheldon approval from the Planning Commission was appealed. And so we'll be looking at a late August or special, it looks like a special city council meeting for that appeal. So I will let you know when that is scheduled. I know we did not have a liaison available for August 2nd because neither Deborah or I forget who the other person was, could not make it. Thank you, Commissioner Press. I don't think we need one because the Habitat's a pretty easy project. If someone is interested in doing that, and obviously the housing element will be, their feedback, and we'll relay to them anything that you all said that they're interested in, but otherwise it's just a feedback session, just like this one. So if anyone's interested in that, the Habitat hearing is the first item. Let me know. Otherwise, I'm happy to relay the Planning Commission's thoughts on that one. And I think that is about it for my staff, for my planning director's report this time.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yes.
Absolutely.
With the appeal, was it the applicant who appealed? Or did you
No,
mention-
it was a member of the public who appealed, and her description was that she did not feel the burden of proof had been met
Okay.
by the applicant.
Just getting that down.
Oh, and one other item from the city council last Tuesday, they also heard, just so you're aware of what's going on, the Head West Market had applied to, and this was a special event permit because it was city right away, so it didn't go to the Planning Commission, to close McKinley Street. They had originally applied to close all the way up to Petaluma Avenue, which would have included Brown Street and the Rialto Cinemas driveway. This at a staff level, we denied that, but we did all of them resubmit, not including those. So they had submitted for closing up to the Rialto McKinley Street for that 100 feet or so up to the just east of the Rialto lot. The Rialto Cinema did appeal that, and so the city council heard that appeal last Tuesday, but they did uphold the approval, and that was a staff level approval, but that was I know you guys have done several approvals for the private part of the Head West Market, so if any of you were curious what that is, that's what that was about.
So that goes up to the Rialto, so it was approved up to the Rialto driveway on McKinley?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, and that's just for 2022. We do anticipate the hotel construction in 2023, and so they can always request to extend that through 2023, but I think at that point we'd want to look at and make sure that there weren't conflicts with the construction project. I did meet with the hotel folks about a month or so ago about they're getting ready to put it out to bid, and they're entitled, grab their entitlements and all that. And actually, they are also working with the SSU to get them on board to do archaeology, which may happen this fall. They're not quite sure on the timing of that. They're working out the agreement on that right now.
Okay, great.
There used to
Any
be a
other-
Chinatown through there.
Yes, and I know there was an archaeologist on site when the tractor store, I know that's not its real name, but that's what I knew it as. The Diamond Lumber Mill building was demolished. So they did have archaeologists on site then, but they also need to do some prior to their excavation. So.
I just wanted to let you know, and Carrie and everybody else, I will not be at the first meeting in August, so just FYI.
Correct. So unfortunately, you missed the Calder Creek, but it was
I
either
know.
that or the housing element. And I said, which one would Paul rather miss? And we will be presenting Calder Creek to the city council as well. So
Yeah, I'll catch that.
you can catch that. Yep.
Okay. Very good. It's very exciting to me. Good, then I guess we're ready for adjournment unless there's anything else anyone wants to bring up. Okay, then I'll adjourn this meeting until our regularly held planning commission meeting on August 14th, 2022 at 6 p.m.
Good job,
See you
Sharon.
all then.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Get that air conditioner.